And then let's move on to some news kind of focused on Apple for a bit. So
Yeah, quite a bit here, actually. I was surprised by how much Apple news we had to talk about,
yeah, a lot of it
considering
is
WWDC happened with our last podcast.
yeah, a lot of it is drips and new information coming post
Yeah,
WWDC.
right, right.
Though this first one is I mean, not really necessarily directly related to what we were just talking about with the stuff in Hong Kong and China, but
Hmm.
just Apple diversifying their supply chain in general. So Foxconn is investing $1 billion in India amid a push from Apple to kind of diversify where they make their where Foxconn produces the iPhones.
Right, right. And
So
it's kind of amazing to see Foxconn doing that. I mean, it's basically it's funny that we're talking about Foxconn and that's just immediately Apple news, but it is because they're such a big supplier for them, and
yeah, I mean
it's
Foxconn makes products for a lot of people, but this is specifically related to
yeah.
Apple. Like Apple's pushing them to do this.
I
The
mean, Foxconn is
plant
basically like their biggest customer by a huge margin is Apple, and so like it just
mhm,
makes sense.
yeah. So Foxconn already actually has a plant in India that they use to produce some of the iPhone 10R models.
I remember that.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so what the plan is that this $1 billion investment is expanding that manufacturing plant,
Okay,
and it's going to take place over 3 years, and I think they said it's going to be estimated to create about 6,000 jobs.
that's good.
Um, and the goal with this is to not just have more iPhones produced in India, but potentially start having India be used as an export hub for Apple's supply chain overall.
And it makes sense to have the supply chain be able to run in multiple countries. You never know when something might happen to a given country. And so, like you mentioned here, is diversifying it has benefits in a lot of different directions aside from just, potentially the ability to deal with different laws, have different export hubs and stuff like that. Um,
And then one
it's
other
yeah,
big factor in this is China's wages have been going up faster than India's wages, and
right,
so labor is actually cheaper in India
cheaper
than
there.
it is in
Yeah.
China.
So yeah, the public betas came out for iOS as well, and iPad OS and watchOS,
And macOS.
and macOS. Everything came out, and yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I guess my first question is to you: are these identical to the developer beta 2?
Yes.
Aside from just being called public beta. Okay, so
Yes.
if you're on developer beta 2, there's not really a point in switching to the public beta chain until the next update for public beta comes out.
Correct. From my understanding, even the build numbers are the same.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's good. That was something I was thinking about is should I go ahead and switch to that release chain yet, or should I just wait? And I'm gonna wait till there's another update. I've just
Yeah.
disabled auto updates on everything. So
Yeah. So we both have iPhones, iPads, and Apple Watches, and we're
yep.
both on the betas. So um let's start with iPhone. You're newer to iPhone than me, so what are your thoughts on the beta so far?
Yeah, yeah. So when he says newer to iPhone, the first thing I'll say is I haven't used iOS on a small like phone like device for about a decade, except for to help people in fairly minor instances.
And when you
Um,
use it on a small device, it was an iPod Touch, right? Not an iPhone.
it was an iPod Touch, but at the time, it was an iPod Touch was just an iPhone without cellular. So
Yeah, but it's a little different using it as your like primary device
this is
versus as
true.
your
However,
secondary. That's why I was asking.
I did use it as basically my primary device. I did use
Oh,
it
okay.
for all my communications other than phone calls. So,
Oh,
um, but yeah, it's been a very long time. I've used iPad OS for a long time, and we'll get into that later. That's something I've used more extensively. But I don't know. I'm really interested in the updates that they've pushed out. I feel like iOS 14. Not only is it a really significant change for just iOS and the way it behaves in general, but it's also a change that adds so many features that Android's had for so long that there's very few things that I feel like Android now has in benefit over iPhone, and that's actually been a thing. For the longest time, the argument that I and other Android enthusiasts had was, well, yeah, it might be more buggy, it might be less stable, but you have more hardware options. That's still true, not quite as true, but still true, and you have more brands, of course. But you have more customizability and more features. And so even if it's not as buggy, or even if it's a little more buggy, even if the battery life isn't as good, you have these features that you can play with. And iPhone just felt so restrictive. And iOS 14 helps remove a lot of that, actually. And that's what I've felt with it is, I was pretty happy with 13. I made the switch and used 13 for almost a week. And switching to 14 though is like, it's a significant move in the direction of me not feeling like I miss anything.
Yeah.
The addition of widgets.
Obviously, there's only first-party widgets right now. What are you using?
So right now, the primary widgets that I use, I have the weather widget. I do have Siri app suggestions as a widget because that works incredibly well. And then on my slide over widgets right now, I also have like my battery percentages, my location, and there's a few other things that I want to set up that I haven't set up yet. I haven't really set up as much as I want on the phone yet. I've mostly just been playing with the new features, and I am using it as my primary device for those that might be curious about that. And it's just there's once they add defaults, which isn't available even in the betas yet, but once they add the defaults for the Mail app in the browser, there's pretty much nothing I'll miss from Android. I do think I like Android's notification system a little better still, but it's pretty good on iOS. The notifications are a little more interactive on Android, in my opinion, but they're also sometimes a little buggy. So it does keep them more organized. Like, Android has the categories. And like, of course, like if you see a message, like you can use 2 fingers to swipe open that message and reply in the notification pane right there. But like 20% of the time, that swiping with 2 fingers to try and expand the message just doesn't work right.
Yeah,
Things like that are just irritating.
Yeah, and like for me, the reason that I've never really cared about the interactable notifications that much
Mm-hmm.
is like it's one thing when it's like I want like the Siri and I want the call stuff to be smaller because
Right.
I'm not like typing on that. If I'm already having the keyboard take up half my screen, I don't really
Yeah.
care if the rest of the screen is me typing my message versus like a little bit of what I actually had on my screen being shown and then the notification in the type window in the keyboard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not really that much different in
And
my
things are so
opinion.
fast now to open up an app or whatever that it's
Yeah,
fine to
and
just
getting
go
back
to
to
it.
your previous
Yeah.
app just by swiping over is so quick that it kind of just negates that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Going back to the home screen and stuff. So for me, I'll just show kind of what I'm using. So I have,
Sure.
let me see if it'll focus. I have a weather widget. I have a row of folders, a row of apps, and then I have a widget for shortcuts.
Which
And
is
I've
one I'm
been
going to be adding. I will be adding a shortcuts one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shortcuts is honestly like one of my favorite things as far as being integrated in the OS so well. And
And
I'm
it's
glad
one of
that
the
they've
things that Android kind of had over iOS for a really long time with Tasker so long ago. And
yeah.
shortcuts is different and can do
No,
more.
there are certain things that you can do on Tasker that you'll never be able to do on shortcuts, and there's certain things
A
that
lot
you
of that
can't
requires
do.
root too. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that you can't do on Tasker that you can do on shortcuts because it's integrated well. Like
Yes.
having, so iOS 14 added an accessibility feature where you can tap on the back of the phone if you have a 10 or above to trigger to trigger different actions, a double tap and
Yeah.
a triple tap, and you can integrate with an just an OS level accessibility feature. You can integrate shortcuts into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then like on top of that, it's like default without needing to deal with third-party apps or without needing to deal with root, without needing to deal with potentially rooting your watch or whatever. You can
Mm-hmm.
have shortcuts change your watch faces on your
Yeah.
Apple Watch, and so like you can have an Apple like a Apple Watch face for the morning, and then have that automatically change in the afternoon, or depending on the context. If you set up a schedule for it to change times when you'd be going to work, and you have a work specific watch face, that's all really easy to set up. And
Yeah,
then
and that's the key point too. There is how easy it is. Like a lot of the
yeah,
stuff still ends up being achievable with a combination of Tasker and IFTTT, but
mhm,
like setting up those so it's 2 separate apps that you have to install and learn how to use. It's more clunky and, in my experience, less reliable versus what
yeah,
shortcuts can do.
especially if it has to use IFTTT, in my opinion.
Yeah, IFTTT is a pain in the butt. Actually, I've never
Um,
I've set up so much stuff on there before that just never works, and I just have to
yeah.
disable it. It's very
Well, and then
frustrating.
the other thing is that shortcuts integrates natively with Siri.
Right,
And
right,
it's really easy to not just add something into Siri, but remove something from Siri. And that was my biggest issue with adding things into Google Assistant,
right.
was I found that adding things was not that hard depending on the application, but sometimes removing things just didn't work. Like I
Yeah.
literally had tried to remove commands that I had set up through if this then that for my hue lights, and it just wouldn't delete it. I
I've actually
literally
had a similar instance. I've had similar things with IFTTT, and also I've had an issue with Hue before, where I told it to stop turning my lights on in the morning automatically, and it just kept doing it, and it's still doing it. It's very weird. I need to figure that one out, but
yeah.
it's just like when automation, when you can't disable it and it's something that you set up once and either made a mistake or don't want anymore, it's very
Mhm.
irritating because my lights turn on when I don't want them to and then turn back off when I don't want them to. And
Yeah.
so like I get up in the morning and I come down after eating breakfast to work on stuff in my room, and the lights are all off because
Mhm.
it turned them off based on the timer that I set and then deleted.
Yeah.
So
Are you using any widget stacks?
I am for weather, but just for weather. I just have like my work location and my home location.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to be adding more locations because there's several places I care about. But they work really well. You can't really see it super well because my camera will not focus because it's static focus, but you can see my home screen there a little bit. And
Mhm.
then the widget at the top is a stacked widget. And then I do really like Siri suggestions because it looks like it's just normal apps, but it's totally
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I have my weather widget is actually a stack that is weather, two different news widgets, one that is general top stories, and then one that's a tech news, and
Okay.
then stocks.
I like it.
And
I like
what's
it.
nice is that I have that stack enabled as a smart stack. And
Mhm.
so it will automatically change those. So like if the weather hasn't changed, if it's not expecting to rain anytime soon, and so
Yeah.
it's just showing the static hours, which for those that don't know, so the way the weather widget works is really cool. So if it's like just cloudy or sunny out, then it just shows the upcoming few hours of weather. But if it's expecting to rain soon, now that it has the dark sky data, it will change the widget to show um, the rain within the next hour,
Yeah,
and what
yeah, which
time
is
that
really
should
nice.
show. And
Yeah.
so if the weather widget is not showing that and there's a new top news story, then it'll automatically change it to be the news widget. And so when I open my home screen, if I see that the news widget's there, I know that there's something new.
Yeah, yeah.
And then like it'll only show the stock widget when stocks are still updating. Once the market closes, it never defaults to the stock widget because there's no point.
It's pretty nice. The
Yeah.
stacked widgets is another thing that like I feel like widgets were implemented in a way better than Android. Androids are still more unique and
And
more
they're way
flexible.
more interactable. That's one of the downsides to the way that the widgets work. We haven't really
Yeah.
seen the limitations of that because we're just seeing pretty basic widgets with the first
Yeah,
party
because it's
ones.
just the first party. Yeah.
But so the way that the widgets work in iOS 14 is, and I feel like they'll expand upon this in 15 and down the line,
Mhm.
but in 14, the small widget is a single deep link. That's it. You press on it, it opens the app to wherever the widget is set to open it.
Yeah.
And then in the wider and the much larger widget, you can have multiple deep links. But again, that's all they are, is they're deep links into the app
Yeah.
with the exception of shortcuts. The shortcuts one actually can launch the shortcut without opening the shortcuts app because it essentially the way that they have made shortcuts work at an OS level is that deep linking to the shortcut can launch the shortcut in the smaller windows like Siri because it's again technically it's Siri shortcuts,
Right,
and so it
right.
could take advantage of that new smaller Siri UI
Huh.
in order to so like let's say I'll show an example even though it won't look super great, but like let's say I wanted to log water, so I can press on it and then it pulls the window up right there over the home screen and I can log the water and it just goes away. But if
Yeah.
I click on the weather widget, it
It
opens the
just
weather
opens
app.
the app. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that's definitely like Android's widget implementation is in some ways still better, but the couple things I'll say about that is the first thing is like sure they are way more interactive, but they tend to be more buggy and
Oh
less
yeah.
clean looking. And then the other thing is with Android's widgets is I didn't really find myself using them for anything except for looking at something briefly and then opening up the app.
Yeah,
I
the
didn't
only
really
exception
interact with them that
for
much.
me is music.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the
music's
only
good.
one that I used was but on iOS you can also change music by just opening Control Center. So
Right. Yeah, you have Control Center or the notification pane if you
yeah,
have music currently playing. So
yeah,
it's kind of a workaround there. And that's actually something that I feel like Apple does better is the organization between having both Control Center and a notification pane is like you can see everything that's going on in the background still like Android, but it feels more organized and better looking. And so that's something that I've been happy about. And then, the next thing though, iOS 14 in specific here, and just so everybody knows, there is going to be a dedicated video probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks coming of me talking about my switch over to iOS. Just going into detail of why it's happened and stuff. But the app drawer is a really big deal about iOS 14 that I love. It's really nice because you have the organization of it, and it's all auto organized, which is it actually does a pretty good job. There's a few that I kind of disagree with, but most of it is auto organized really well. You've got the search that works really well. Of course, you can just search with Spotlight search as well for it, but it's nice to only have one home screen. That was something I always hated about Apple, is having to feel like I have to put all these apps in a folder. So they did a great job with that. And just so people can see here, just making sure none of these are showing anything. Okay. So I don't know how well that's going to pick up because, like I said, the camera is a fixed focus, but you see how there's the bigger icons and the smaller icons. So the bigger ones are the ones that it thinks you're more likely to use, and you tap those, it opens that app straight up. But if you tap one of the sets of smaller icons, then it opens up the rest of the apps in that category.
Yeah,
and that's a really cool way.
It learns how you use them to know what you're more likely to use, and so that improves over time too.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is too, is search has just gotten so good now that I don't mind that I do still feel like the home screen system of Apple is not quite as good as Android, but it's really close. But the search is so quick and so good on here and easier to access by enabling things like the triple tap on the back that I don't really care. I just search for the app I want to open anyway.
Yeah.
So
I mean, realistically, since I had initially switched, and I think I talked about this last week, but since I switched to iOS originally, even when I went back to Android, I just set up a launcher that let me swipe down to search because it's just so much easier than having to try and find applications in the first place.
It's really interactive. Yeah, it's just you know what you want, so type it.
And then have you messed with hiding homepages yet? Because I really love that ability.
I have not played around with that, so I only have one homepage right now. The rest of them are just gone. I don't know. That's kind of the way I like to use it. I don't know if I'll use the hiding homepage feature. I'm not sure yet, but.
And then let's move on. So iPad, you have a bit more experience with that. So what are your thoughts on iPadOS 14?
So I really like it, but the first thing I want to talk about is my biggest complaint about it. And this is something that I've spent a little bit of time thinking about, and I haven't even really talked to you about this much, but I really, 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 really hate that there is not an app library on iPad. Why did they not put that on iPad? Whereas, it feels like iPad and iOS, like iPadOS and iOS are supposed to feel basically identical, just iPadOS can do some things with a keyboard and a bigger screen that you can't on iOS. And having that missing app library feels wrong. It feels like not just because I want it, but it feels like as a normal user you would expect it, and then you're like, why does it not have that when my iPhone has that?
So let me give you their response, because they were asked about why both with widgets and with the app library, why that didn't make its way in the same ways to
and the widgets bug me less. It's the library that bothers me most.
But for those that don't know, the widgets, you can't put them anywhere on the home screen. It's still delegated just to the side.
But the side can be pinned, so it's still on the home screen, when it's in landscape mode. But most of the time people keep them that way, I think.
But they said that they felt with the larger amount of screen real estate when it came to the app library that just wasn't as necessary, and so they focused on other things. Realistically, the probably more accurate answer is that they just didn't have time to get it implemented for 14.
That could be, and I just hope they add it because it's a very nice feature. I still haven't taken the time to organize the apps on my iPad, my newer iPad Pro, and that is because it feels like a more tedious task when I can't just delete them all from the home screen and then just add the few that I want.
You can still just put all of them in one folder and it's essentially deleted. It's obviously not as good looking, but it's still essentially the same.
This is true, but it's a little bit of a pain.
Since both you and I use search for the access, it's still.
And then that's what I'll touch on actually right there. Search. Oh man, having command space let you open Spotlight search anywhere. I'm
Mhm.
basically on Windows. That's what it feels like. It's like you just command space and you type and you're good to go. Like it's so easy to switch apps. And I'm impressed with the multitasking capabilities now of iPad OS, and of course, a lot of that actually hasn't changed from 13 to 14, the multitasking, but just like the ability to have two apps open side by side, as well as slide over, as well as like a picture-in-picture video going, is just really nice. It feels like you can do
Yeah.
a lot on it at once, and it doesn't get hung up at all. Um, but in regards to like the other iPad OS 14 features, it's really
Yeah,
nice.
'cause I was gonna talk about Scribble.
Yes, yes. You go ahead and
Because
talk about Scribble. You've used it more than me.
yeah, so well, that's what I was gonna say is like when it comes to what they had time to get done, feature wise, and not having time to get the app library and the widgets working as well on iOS or
iPad, yeah,
iPadOS 14.
yeah,
I think most of their time went to Scribble, and personally, I think it was definitely worth it because damn, Scribble is awesome.
yes,
So, quick recap of Scribble if you haven't seen the event or you haven't seen our last week's podcast. So the way that the Apple Pencil had worked on iPad since it came out was that it only really worked in situations where it was specifically set up to work. So if you had a program that could take down writing or a notes app or a drawing app, then obviously it worked. But other than that, if you were handwriting notes and then you got a message from someone, you'd have to put the pencil down to respond with yes or type
yeah,
it with the pencil. Now, Scribble has essentially enabled um, any text box can be input for the pencil.
yeah,
And so you can just write and it will turn your handwriting into text. And in my opinion, it works very, very well. I've seen some people say that
yes.
they felt like it didn't work for their handwriting. Um, but like in the example I sent you before you had updated to the beta, my handwriting was terrible on purpose. Like I really messed up that E and it recognized it perfectly.
Well,
Um,
it seems to actually recognize words and phrases a little bit, and I think that's
yeah.
helping it. Because I've noticed there's times where I type something really bad, or write something really bad with it, but like it corrects it pretty quickly to what I probably would have meant.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you can interact with the text with the pencil more. So if you're
Yeah.
in a supported app, you can like just circle the text to highlight a big chunk of text. You can like scribble over
If you draw
words
a straight
leaves.
line through text, by the way, it'll also highlight it. Just one
Yeah.
line, not scribbling it
Yeah.
out, and that's really easy to do. Precise but long length text
Mhm.
selection.
Yeah, and then another nice thing is if you want to add text in, let's say you want to like as you were writing, you accidentally wrote two words too close to each other, so it came out as one word, or you want to add something in between, you can just draw a line down in between the space, and it adds a
Yeah.
space there, and it
Yeah.
lets you start writing there.
Yeah.
So there's all these things they really like. They built out the handwriting recognition and then thought through each of the different scenarios in which you would need another feature, and they added those features in.
Yeah. They
And
did,
so
and
I
I'm
really
I'm impressed.
yeah, I love it. And then also if you're using like let's say the Notes app or something else that supports shape input,
Yeah.
then what you can do is you can draw the shape and then as you finish drawing it, you just hold the pencil there and it corrects it to like a proper shape rather than your hand drawn one. So if you're doing a square, if you're like let's say you're using the notes but you want to make a little diagram, you can really easily make a square, hold it for a second, write in what you want within that square or next to the square, and
Yeah.
then like do another shape, do a star, a circle, whatever you need to do. And it's really quick and easy to throw that on there and to just adjust everything.
It's pretty impressive, and so what I will say is like I am not a fan of handwriting. I hate handwriting. I prefer typing.
Hmm.
But I did play around with it quite a bit, and it works surprisingly well. And I feel like its handwriting recognition is better than what Microsoft has on the Surface, which is the next best thing in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's like the Surface I was very impressed with, and I feel like it hasn't gotten that much better on the Surface in the last 3 years. But when it did come out, it was best in class by far.
Yeah, and I mean, even for people that don't use the pencil normally for handwriting, like let's say you primarily use it for drawing,
Yeah,
or you just use it as a general stylus.
that's exactly
It's
how I
just
use it.
nice if you need to do something that's a really quick response. Like if you get a text message and you just want to respond with yes, it's
Yeah.
nice to be able to just write yes rather than actually having to like put it down or magnet it to the side and start
Hmm.
using your keyboard. It's like you just continue your action and go back to what you were doing.
Yeah. And it recognizes, by the way, it does recognize cursive and like regular print both really well.
Yeah.
I primarily do cursive. That's just how I write, and it does a really, really good job. I'm pretty impressed with it. And like for me, the way I use the Apple Pencil is just a stylus. I like when it's in my lap, I kind of keep the iPad a little further away from me. I don't like holding my arm out to reach if I'm scrolling through Reddit or something, so I'll use the stylus as an extension.
Yeah.
And it's just more comfortable to sit and use that. But it's nice to have it available to do minor responses and stuff. Now, one thing I would like them to fix, and it's not even really fixed, it is intentional, but with iPadOS 14, I would love to see if they could add the option to allow the Apple Pencil to interact with things like Control Center and notifications. So we understand why you can't. I would like an option to choose between the two, even if it's in accessibility or something like that. So, which is where Apple sometimes hides the power user stuff. Like, I do not draw. I am not a digital artist. I do not use it to draw. Like, I basically never will. So I don't need it to avoid interacting with the home screen and, Control Center and slide over and stuff in order to be able to draw on the edge of the screen. And so like my personal preference would be able to flip that over so that then the Apple Pencil does respond to those things so that you can interact with everything instead of having to put it off to the side weird to use my finger to open up like slide over, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that, in my opinion, would be a good addition. But
or something else that they could do, since double tapping can already change certain things, it'd be really cool to have the ability to like, I guess it really wouldn't work because most drawing apps take advantage of it. I was going to say it'd be nice to have like you could double tap to get out of drawing mode.
what about a
But
triple
maybe
tap?
I was going to say they
Yeah.
could add some other kind of gesture,
Yeah.
triple tap or something, to just like a way to get out of drawing mode so you can do those interactions.
Mhm.
That way you can further not have to stop using the pencil.
Yeah, and it responds to those taps really well. Like that was something I played with, even though I'll probably never really use it.
Yeah.
Although I do like using the Apple Pencil to take notes and stuff sometimes if I'm taking notes and being able to draw interactions between stuff. But it works really well. It responds really well to that double tap, and I feel like a triple tap would work pretty darn good too. So that would be a cool feature that I'd like to see. And then I actually did want to touch on battery life on both of them. It feels pretty much the same. I'm pretty impressed actually. My battery life does not seem any worse with 14, even though it's still in beta. Have you had the same experience?
Yeah, I haven't really noticed any impact. I know some people have, but I think that's with the older phones, which would make sense if they're not as, if they're struggling a little bit more to handle like widgets on the home screen and stuff.
And they have to clock up higher and stuff like that. Yeah.
So that would make sense. The other big bug, which I haven't checked on my phone actually, I was just checking on my tablet. Go and check your storage.
So iPhone storage, let's see here. I don't know. I haven't opened it up recently, actually. I don't know if I've opened it since the update.
You'll pretty much be able to tell right away because, like in my case, my storage is almost full.
Why do I have like 15 gigs of other?
Yeah, so that's a bug in the beta.
So is it actually using that space, or is it?
I don't know because I haven't tried to fill up my phone. I don't think anybody that I've seen reporting it has like then gone on to try and fill up their phone.
Oh.
I don't think so. I think it's a reporting error, but
okay, so I kept it open and my apps section all of a sudden got way bigger. So it showed what would have been probably about 2 gigs of apps, which seemed a little off to me, and other was like 15 gigabytes worth. And now apps looks like about 10 gigs worth, and other looks like about 10 gigs worth.
Yeah, so I think the other is just being reported incorrectly.
That's my thought. Yeah.
Because like if I look at the amount that it's showing my apps section take up, that's about right because it's showing a pretty significant amount. Like you can see the red bar on my screen.
Yeah, and mine's doing that now too, but it wasn't at first.
Yeah, but it's like that makes sense for me because I have like almost 5 gigs of Spotify. I have like 3 gigs of podcasts. I have several games installed.
Mine keeps moving around.
Huh.
It showed
Mine is not doing that.
Mine showed system at first, and on the left, and the red is the apps, and then the next little gray part over is system, and it showed system first, and then showed apps is almost no space, and then apps got bigger, and then it moved apps to the front of the line.
Wow.
So it seems really buggy.
My other is taking up 20 gigs.
Yeah, mine's only about 10 now. but my system is also taking up about 10, and I think that used to be lower.
Mine's 12.9. I think that's
Oh,
that's
is that
not
just
that
normal?
abnormal because
Okay.
the OS update was somewhat sizable.
Hmm. Interesting. That's weird.
Yeah,
Huh.
that's one of the biggest reported bugs. That and then people having worse battery life on older phones.
Yeah, yeah. Which
So
again, on newer phones, it seems to be almost no different.
yeah,
Um.
at least in your case, it's only like 10 gigs. There are some people, like
Yeah.
most people who are suffering from the bug, it's just nearly filling up their phone. Like in my case, where it's just almost like I'm at 60 of 64 gigs used.
Wow.
And there are people who have 512 gig iPhones who are having like other take up 200 gigs of data.
That's kind of insane.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was wondering
So
if maybe it's some kind of backup error, but if it's using up more space than like the rest of the system,
yeah, no,
it
it's
doesn't make
essentially
sense.
just
Yeah.
like in a lot of the cases where people are having the issue, it's using up data relative to their free space.
Hmm.
So
That's
don't
weird.
know what's up
I
with that, but that's
hope
an
they fix
interesting
it.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting one. I bet you the next beta might fix it.
Yeah.
But yeah, odd.
Um, and then both of us have Apple Watches. Have you been washing your hands correctly?
I have, and it turns out that
Okay.
I have pretty much always been. So
Yeah.
it didn't feel any different. So that's actually, speaking of battery life, as we transition into watchOS, that's one thing I've noticed. And albeit I only used watchOS 6 for like 2 days before I switched to the 7 developer beta, but the battery life does seem to be worse on it.
But
Have
also, you're
you?
probably doing more on it than you were the first 2 days, I feel like.
Probably. And it doesn't feel significantly worse, but it's like it feels like at the end of the day, it's closer to like 14% range instead of like 20% range. So it's
Do
not
you have always
drastic.
on display on?
I do have always on display on.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I
I
use
got
mine pretty, like my Apple Watch, the goal that I have set with it is basically just get me through until like I'm getting ready for bed, and that's fine with
Yeah.
me.
I
So
use sleep tracking, and that's part
yeah,
of why I
yeah,
don't want that on. And what's nice is that if you do have the sleep app set up on watchOS 7, so for those that don't know, Apple added in proper, like official built-in sleep tracking.
yeah,
It doesn't track as much data as other things, but most people don't need that data. And if you do, there's still the third-party apps.
yeah,
Um, but the built-in one, it will actually, if you have that enabled, give you different battery indicators than just the normal you're running low. It'll
yeah.
specifically give you indicators to make sure that you can stay topped up for sleeping. So it'll remind you if like afternoon, mid-afternoon or mid-evening when you'd be home, if you need to charge it a bit to get you through the night and then charge it in the morning some, because like the Apple Watch charges really fast. Um,
Yeah. Well, it's fairly fast. I think it's still technically like an hour and a half from 0 to 100 though.
yeah, but the initial charging is really fast. Like you don't
Yeah.
always need it at 100.
Mhm.
And especially if you're charging it how they have you essentially suggest you do it for the sleep tracking,
Yeah.
where you're charging it in the evening and in the morning. Um,
Right.
and so you're charging it more frequently, but you don't ever really need it at 100 in that case.
No,
Um,
this is true. Yeah, and I mean, even then, in the morning or whatever, like an hour is gonna get you quite a bit.
yeah,
I
even
just
though
don't like
like
wearing
30 minutes.
watches at night or anything at night, really, and that's part of why I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
use it. Otherwise, I might give it a shot, and maybe I will at some point, but I don't know.
Yeah. I really like it. I do think I preferred having more data than the sleep app gives you. Like, let me open the sleep app and I'll see exactly what all it's showing in here. It's mostly just showing how long you slept with the official Apple one.
Mm.
Whereas
Does
like
it
if you
track REM
use
cycles?
no, that's what I'm saying.
Oh.
So it's just mostly showing how long you slept.
Mm.
Whereas if you use something like Sleep Watch, it does get more detail.
Okay.
My
Okay.
assumption is that Apple probably will have on the next Apple Watch or two down the line improved sleep tracking, but that they have internal quality standards that they want as far as reliability of hitting those measurements.
Right.
And my guess is that the trackers on here are pretty good, but not as good as Apple would like
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
REM cycles and stuff. And so they just go, rather than giving you okay data, they just don't give you the data, which is a
Yeah.
very Apple like move.
Interesting. Hmm.
Um, but
I
um,
mean, I would like to see them add more native tracking. If it tracked REM cycles and stuff, I might be more interested in it. But
mhm.
as of right now, I really don't like to sleep with anything on my wrist. So I think I
Yep.
would actually prefer like one of the head mount sleep trackers or something like that versus a watch actually
Well, and
myself.
you know
But
they have you can, and I think actually Apple sells it on their store because I think they invested in the company that makes it. But
mm,
there's a sleep tracker that's actually a pad for your bed that goes under your bed sheet.
oh, interesting. That's kind of
Yeah.
cool, huh? I think
Um,
sleep tracking is an important thing, especially most Americans are sleep deprived. That's a big problem in this country, and the ability to keep an eye on what kind of sleep you're getting and what kind of quality of sleep you're getting. I think just helps encourage people to do the right thing with their body
yeah.
in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's nope, that's an app. That's not what I was looking for. Uh, but yeah, I've seen before. I don't know if they still sell it, but Apple was selling on their website like a sleep tracking pad that went in your bed, and the app integrated with Apple Health and everything very well. And
Yeah.
it tracked a lot more than a watch could anyway. Um, and yeah, so other than that, I mean, WatchOS 7 is a fairly minimal update.
hmm
Um, I know you haven't really messed with shortcuts yet, so I'm assuming you haven't done much with shortcuts on your watch.
No, no, I haven't. I'm hoping
Okay.
to get a little bit more into it this week and start automating some more stuff, but I'm just still getting on the cusp of like what I can do with all the stuff I have now.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot with shortcuts. Like it is essentially its own programming.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's pretty awesome. I mean,
So,
I haven't done hardly anything with it. I've opened it. That's about it.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so like I have, for example, as I had mentioned earlier, where you can automate watch faces. So I have a watch face that activates in the morning that has caffeine tracking as one of the shortcuts on there, and water tracking.
I
And
need to
then
track caffeine, yeah.
yeah, and because I've been deciding not to consume caffeine in the afternoon, I have it so that my watch face changes later in the day to something else that doesn't have the caffeine tracking because I don't need it on there anymore.
Uh-huh.
And so it's really cool to be able to have different actions, different apps, different complications quickly accessible on your watch based on time of day, for example. I wish that Apple would add in, so they have the ability to set automations based on location.
Mhm.
However, the issue is that that is one of the automations that, just like time was before iOS 14, where you could set up time-based automations, but you
Right.
still had to approve the action. It wasn't fully automated.
Yeah.
And so like what a lot of people have been asking is that they want the ability to change watch faces based on location. So you show up to work and it changes to a work watch face. You show up to the gym that you normally go to and it changes to a gym watch face. That would be really cool, and I feel like one of the few shortcuts related things, at least on the watch specifically, that's really missing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think so too. And I guess I'm you know, obviously I didn't spend a lot of time with watchOS 6, so it's hard for me to determine how different it feels, but watchOS 7 seems like a really minor update. Even though it seems like a
if
significant change. It's like they added half-ass sleep tracking. When I say half-ass, it just means it just can't do that much. They added the hand washing, but that was also with that was didn't that worked with iOS 6. I think they pushed it out to iOS 6 too, or
no, they
watchOS
didn't.
6. No, not at all.
No.
Oh, and then
Well, so they also added stuff that's just not really applicable yet because the App Store hasn't been updated.
mhm,
So they're adding the ability to have like, so Apple's going to start curating like watch face designs and like complication setups and stuff in the App Store. But
mhm.
then also you can share watch faces now, which you couldn't before.
That's a
And
big
so there
deal.
will be like online repos of watch
Mhm,
faces. And so that's a pretty helpful one. They added more stuff into fitness. So before, for example, with workouts, for it used to just be like just strength training. And now
mhm.
they have like functional strength training versus like general strength
I did
training
see
versus
that,
core
and that's something
training.
I definitely am going to play around with some. I haven't used that yet. I've used the regular like running tracking. I used that
Yeah.
earlier today. Actually, it works really well. And then the cycling stuff's cool too. But I don't know. It just feels more minor in comparison to iOS and iPadOS. I guess is what I was saying.
I mean, even
Whereas those are
iPadOS
huge.
14 was
But
a pretty minor update. It was
this is
mostly
true. iOS was
iOS
the
14.
huge one, and then
Yeah,
Big
whereas
Sur for Mac was pretty big too.
yeah,
Yeah.
whereas last year, iPadOS and watchOS were bigger updates. It seems like they just dictate their resources, like instead of just like, oh, every year is going to be a big update, because that's just not realistically going to happen all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, you have, put out some features next year and that are done, and then save the big features that take more time for when they're ready.
Right. Right.
Um, but
No,
then
that makes sense.
also,
Yeah.
like they just did a lot of smaller stuff with the watch. They improved a lot of the hearing health related things. They
They did do a
improved,
better job with that, definitely.
yeah, they added the on device dictation. They added the translation stuff. Shortcuts is pretty significant if you use it, but it's useless if you don't.
Yeah.
They added more to the Move app, separate from just the new workouts. And also the new workouts, like for them to add workouts that are like accurately tracked, that is a
Yeah.
lot of work. That is not an easy task, especially as they're
Well,
getting
especially
more.
more complex workouts. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than like, oh, we have one that's just a general strength training. Now we're getting into more specific strength training, so it's going to be more
Right.
accurate. That takes a lot of development time and a lot of research.
This is true.
And then especially with like the dance one,
And then I
that's a
guess they
pretty,
also have the on-device dictation, which is a pretty big deal too. Like
yeah,
some of these updates seem small, but they were a big deal to add. So
yeah.
it
And I
makes
think
sense.
that's what it really comes down to, is it's like the time it takes for them to develop some of this stuff is more significant than people realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just whether or not that feature is all that useful is very person dependent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I think, unless you're really focused on hearing health, or you're really focused on specific types of workouts, it's probably not as big of a deal.
Yeah. I will
But
say
that's
though, the
fine, 'cause
on-device dictation is noticeably better than it was on WatchOS 6.
yeah,
The dictation's really fast.
yeah,
So that's at least that's an update. And one thing though that I will say I'm a little disappointed about with Apple Watch, and I don't know if this is Apple's fault or if this is developers' fault. I think it's the latter. But there are like none of the audio apps I use, Plex, SoundCloud, Tidal, they don't have watch apps. So
yeah.
and
So
like I would
that
like
is the developer's fault. Apple didn't
okay.
have the APIs for a while, and a lot of
Okay.
these companies made a big deal about how they didn't have the APIs, and then Apple added the APIs, and they didn't fucking use them.
Dude,
Pandora,
I'm
I
I'm
think, is the only
frustrated
one.
by it because like how nice is it when I'm working out, right? Like the watch has Wi-Fi, so I don't even have to have my phone on me. It's and like I mostly work out indoors. I do weightlifting, treadmill, that kind of stuff, right? And like it would be really nice to just have my headphones pair with my watch and just play Tidal on my watch, and I can leave the phone and tablet and everything else indoors. And I
Yeah.
can't do that right now.
Yeah, Pandora literally has gone so far in that you don't need the Pandora app installed on your phone. You can set up Pandora just on your watch and stream. And
Wow,
yet, for
that's
some
nice.
reason, Spotify and especially Spotify, who has I'd say the biggest resources out of a lot of these,
Yes, yes.
outside of YouTube Music as well. But like Spotify, YouTube Music, Tidal, none of these services have added this,
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
it's
especially the big ones that have, like I said, Spotify, YouTube Music, like Tidal has been slow to develop apps for every platform. Like they've just been
and
slow about that, and that's like
realistically, I think that they'll beat Spotify and YouTube Music to supporting it.
I think you're probably right, and that's just weird because like they don't have the same finances of these other companies, right? Like Tidal's just doing audio. They do have some big investment backing, but like I don't think they have a very big development team. They seem to be kind of slow to do things, and I don't know, maybe that has something to do with the fact that they are paying more per play, so they don't have as much money to pay for as many employees. I don't know.
Mhm.
But like I would just really 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 like that. Like that would be an ideal thing for me because I don't want to have to use iTunes, and right now I feel like I'd have to use iTunes to do it. And I don't know, maybe I'll grab that free Apple Music subscription that I got from buying some of these devices and just just use that and hope that Tidal has something out afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did when I first got my Apple Watch, and it's like, it's really nice to be able to go on like a run and
Yeah.
not bring my phone, because like I have AirPods, and so I can have my AirPods paired to my watch, and I can just go for a run. If I need to make a phone call, I can.
And you can
Otherwise,
pair any headphones to the watch, right?
yes, I believe so.
Okay. Okay.
It's just easier with AirPods.
Yeah.
But like it's really nice to be able to just go for a run, not bring my phone, not have to worry about carrying that around, just go.
Yeah.
Um, but I have to use Apple Music if I want to do that, because Spotify, it's just a fucking remote app.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And actually, I was gonna ask, do you have the LTE edition of the Apple Watch?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Specifically so I can do stuff like go for a run without
Mhm.
my phone and stuff like that.
And I almost wonder if I should have gotten that, but I
I
think
don't think you would ever use, like, you don't
I
go
don't
on
think I'll
outdoor
use it
runs.
much. Yeah, I don't usually go on outdoor runs, and if I hike, I'm probably gonna bring my phone. So
Oh
like
yeah,
that's the only outdoor like workout activity I do is primarily hiking. And I bring my phone when I do that. Otherwise, it's a lot of indoor workouts. So,
yeah,
so I and it has full Wi-Fi, so it's like I can still use it, like separately.
yeah.
um, so yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, I do. That's right. I got three of the 4 months free Apple Music things, but of course I can only use one of them
Yeah,
because it's
and
new
like
subs only.
the podcast app I use, Pocket Casts, you can use on the Apple Watch, but you have to have their premium service to do it.
Yeah, I guess if they're gonna put the development time into it and make you pay for it, it's not the end of the world.
I just am annoyed because it's a subscription. I'm tired of every app moving
Oh,
to subscription services.
I don't like subscriptions either. It's like that's one. Well, you remember that's one of the big reasons I use DaVinci Resolve and not Adobe products. Aside from crashing all the time, is I just
Yeah,
subscriptions annoy the shit out of me.
yeah.
So yeah, lots of good changes there though. I'm impressed with it. I'm happy to be in the ecosystem. Like I said, I will make a video about that. There's a lot of interesting thoughts I have about that being a very big like Linux and FreeBSD user and a Windows user for a really long time. And just like for a mobile setup, especially with these new updates, I feel like iOS is a lot better, like or Apple is a lot better than the other options that are available. And so like I won't use it for real work that requires a lot of power or gaming or anything like that. But for a mobile setup, it's really great.
Mhm.
And then
I mean, speaking of power, Apple is
yeah,
making their own GPUs for Mac.
that's
Um,
true. Yeah, yeah. Although I wanted to mention something about AirPods, and that actually kind of leads into
oh
our
yeah,
next section too. So what I wanted to say is, I like the AirPods Pro are pretty interesting, and part of me almost wants to get those just because they're so much easier to use, even though they don't sound as good as my Sennheisers. Um, and do you have the Pros? I can't remember. Are you
yes, I
happy
do.
with them?
Very. The only issue that I have, and this is not the fault of the pros, this is the
Uh
fault
huh.
of when I'm at work, I have to wear a suit and I keep it in the suit coat pocket, and sometimes I lean over and it falls out. Is that
Mm.
on one of the AirPods, on my left one, it has fallen enough that there's something loose in here, and so I actually can't have this in when I'm talking,
Oh.
because something's vibrating in here, and specifically, it's like it doesn't all like vibrate really so much with music,
Mm-hmm.
but the like frequency of my voice causes it to vibrate, and it's really fucking
Oh, I
irritating.
see.
So that's my fault though. That's not the fault of these. Before that, it was great. The only issue that I had before that was the active noise canceling was really good when they first came out, and then
Mm-hmm.
they released an update that actually made it like for whatever reason the active noise canceling got worse. They have
Like
since fixed it.
substantially? Oh,
Uh,
okay.
it was noticeably worse.
Okay.
But they've since fixed it with a newer update. Um, But yeah, overall, I do really like
Hmm.
my AirPods. It's really just the issue that I have from me dropping it.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I will say, like, I'm an audiophile. Sound matters most to me, and the Sennheisers are still, by a pretty significant margin, the best sounding true
Yeah, I
wireless
feel like
headphones
if you
out
get
there.
the AirPods, I'm gonna have to listen to you bitch about the sound quality.
I think you'd probably end up in that way. And I don't know if the convenience of them's worth it. I mean, they have a better microphone, but I never use my headphones to talk to people.
Mhm.
I guess the one thing is the transparency mode's a lot better on AirPods than it is on the Sennheisers. Um, and I don't know if I would use my headphones more often if I could listen to other things at the same time. Have you
Yeah,
used that much?
I use it all the time.
Okay. And you just turn it on and it's like you're not wearing them practically.
Yeah, so it's literally just you press and hold on the stem to switch it out from noise canceling to transparency mode.
Hmm.
So like I can pause the music with the quick tap, and then I can switch into transparency mode, and it's like I'm not wearing them.
Okay. Okay. And if you do leave the music playing, it's like speaker. It sounds almost like speakers, right? Like you can still hear everything
Kinda,
else.
yeah. You can hear
Yeah.
the outside stuff a lot more than you can because you can actually, if you have your AirPods connected, then in the control center,
Hmm.
the volume is for the AirPods, and you can actually press on it, and it'll give you the option of transparency mode of, in fact, I'll just
Do it.
yeah. But it'll give you transparency mode, uh, no altered mode, or well, actually, I don't think, because these have in-ear detection, so I actually don't think that will work. I'm not gonna.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so you can actually hear what it sounds like without transparency mode and without active noise cancellation, and it's much more of what you'd expect if like something's jammed in your ear, so you can't hear as much.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but
And
you can
that's a feature
change.
I think I'd benefit from. So that's the only thing that's really pushing me into kind of considering them. But yeah, I don't know.
Um, However, and I know we talked about this a little bit last week, but remember, these are getting support for spatial audio. So if you're watching something, let's say you're watching something that has Dolby Atmos support
Yeah.
or surround sound support on your iPad, you will, once that feature comes out, be able to get some of that effect from the
Yeah, that's a
AirPods.
good point. Yeah.
So we'll see when that comes out how well it works, but
Right.
um, that's really nice.
And
Overall, I'm really
then,
happy with them.
well, that's good then. I don't know. I might consider it. I'm just trying to figure out, like, I don't use my Sennheisers that much. It's basically just for working out, and I'm just not
Uh,
sure I do anything different with the AirPods. The
then yeah,
transparency
you
mode's the
shouldn't.
part that make me consider, but I just probably won't.
Yeah, I mean, like, how often do you find yourself in situations where it's like, oh, I would be listening to music if I could hear things outside of.
Not that frequently. Yeah, that's true. Versus like, when I'm in the car, like obviously I have the car stereo, and so yeah, that's
Yeah,
probably true. I don't think I'd use it that often
yeah.
unless I
From
started doing
from
more outdoor work. If I started doing like hiking more, I might want to use them constantly in transparency mode while hiking. Um, but I need to check the Sennheisers too because they do have a transparency mode that seems to work okay, and I just need to figure out if I can have a good way to enable that because it doesn't seem to always enable properly. Like
oh
the
yeah.
Sennheisers are a little buggy, and that's the problem I've had with them. Is sometimes like
Mm,
I do a tap to pause, and it just doesn't pause, but it turns transparency mode on, or the other way around. It's really
yeah.
weird.
Do the Sennheiser support multi-device pairing?
I
Specifically, like the rapid switch between the devices?
I think it's only I can't remember. Usually though, I just like I can just go into Control Center and just tap them if I want to switch them to another device, and it
Yeah.
connects over that way.
I was just
So
asking about like the AirPods are getting that update to support just pressing play.
yeah, yeah, right.
And so, by the way, you can set up a shortcut to kind of do that without having to go into your settings.
Oh, okay.
People have done that with AirPods where they'll have a shortcut set up to kind of function as like a really quick way to change which one it's paired to. So on your iPad, you could have a shortcut that makes your AirPods essentially switch its pairing to that until, so in your case, your Sennheisers, switch its pairing to
Right.
that as a way to kind of get around having to go into the settings each time. So it's a little bit better of an experience.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
but I am very excited for the ability to like be listening to music on my phone and then just plop my iPad down, start the video, and it switches the audio. Um,
Right.
so that'll be very nice. However, for the AirPods, there is a new feature that
And this
most
is
people
pretty
won't really
cool.
need, but for those that need it, it's very helpful.
Yes.
So in iOS 14, they have a new like headphone accommodation feature that lets you kind of tweak how the audio sounds more so that you can hear, you know, voices if you're watching a video. You can hear those better, or you can turn down bass. Like you can tweak the audio a little bit more. But what makes it more cool is that they are adding the ability to utilize the headphone accommodations feature not just with on-device audio, but
Hmm.
with transparency mode. And so what that does is it essentially turns AirPods into hearing aids.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Now, if you have very, very like specific hearing issues or you have really bad hearing, probably not going to work. It's still something you should like consult with a doctor about in those cases. But there are situations where people just need voices to be amplified a bit, and being able to use these instead is really convenient for one because a lot of people that have hearing aids don't want to also have to like constantly switch between hearing aids and headphones. So they
Yep.
just don't use headphones in situations where they otherwise might want to. In
Yeah.
fact, that was one of the big like the top comments on the Reddit post about this that I had seen was someone saying that they have to use hearing aids but it's not like a significant issue where they would need very specific hardware. They just need certain things amplified a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And this will allow them to actually utilize headphones in a way that they really have never been able to do, that most people can if they want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
And
It's pretty
so,
cool, actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
really the big thing that we need to figure out now to see how well it's going to work is what the latency is going to be, because hearing aids obviously process everything on device, so the latency is extremely quick.
Yes.
They have to be. If latency is, I think it's above like 40 milliseconds, I think is what I read, then it can cause issues. And
Okay.
so it'll be dependent on that. Now, Apple has their own chips in these to handle certain communications, so they can do things that other headphones really can't over just like generic ass Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Um, and so they might be able to handle that better. If not, and since this also only works on the pros, it's entirely possible that they're processing it on device.
It could be. Yeah. I mean, either that or like you said. I mean, Bluetooth is latency AF.
Yeah.
So, so that makes sense. It's a cool feature. You know, I like seeing little like life improvement things like that being added to products. So, oh, excuse me. Pretty awesome. Oh man. Woo. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's obviously not a feature I'd use, but it's still a pretty interesting thing for them to
Yeah,
be
I'm
doing.
I'm always happy to see accessibility features like this that'll make like meaningful impacts into how people can use the products and like improve someone's quality of life. Um,
Yeah.
that otherwise is kind of hampered by having to, in this case, use hearing aids, and so they really, it's much more inconvenient for them to be able to switch to headphones and listen to music and stuff. It's just
Yeah.
a nice feature.
I think so. I think so.
So
I think stuff like that being added is awesome. Yeah. So then you were talking about something here in regards to GPU horsepower. And this is an interesting thing. So I'll let you continue cuz you actually filled out the information on it.
okay. So, yeah, there's on Apple's like developer website, according to Apple Insider, they found documents that talk about Apple's own GPUs. And the way that it was set up on the document, it didn't sound like it was them talking about like the stuff that just how at least the current built-in GPUs for like the A13.
Mhm.
Um, Now we have no idea really what this means. This could mean just beefed up GPUs within the SoC of Apple's in-house silicon Macs.
Yeah.
Or it could mean that Apple's planning on having separate CPU and GPU chips for their Macs. That way they could have, um, if every single, let's say, MacBook Pro that runs these is going to have the A25. I'm just making up examples, but like the
Right.
A25 CPU, and then they want to be able to switch between different GPUs based on the model you go with. This would probably be a more manufacturing efficient way to do it than having, um, and like the CPU and the GPU on the SoC have to be different for each one.
Mhm.
They can just pump out the CPUs, which makes them cheaper, and then pick the GPU based on the need. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think they'll go that route, but we just really don't know. I mean, it's been, we haven't really seen anyone take ARM for actual computing that seriously outside of the server market.
Yeah, we've
Um,
seen some pretty hefty supercomputers and stuff running it,
yeah,
but nothing that's like the kind of consumer slash workstation oriented performance stuff.
yeah. I mean, there's never been, ARM XPS that has proper support for it, like anything like that. So,
Yeah.
it's all like new ground, and we just kind of have to wait and see what actually comes. But Apple I mean, this was kind of expected for Apple to beef up their GPUs if they're going to be beefing up their, um, ARM-based CPUs for their Macs.
Right, right. Yeah, for
So,
sure.
it's just kind of more
And I
actual
mean, they have
documentation
the
for it.
OS control to do it, and that right there is also part of it. Is like ARM just doesn't work with Windows right now. It's a pretty terrible experience for the most part.
Yeah, and even with Microsoft working with Qualcomm on chips, they've just never done a good job.
Mm-hmm. And they're not high performance enough either, which Apple probably is going to do a better job on that front.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's a few reasons for that. I mean, for one, Qualcomm is just not as good at chip development.
Uh huh.
But also, Apple has been making ARM chips, and Apple's been designing ARM chips longer than Qualcomm has. So Qualcomm has been making ARM chips
Yeah.
for a long time, obviously. However, they didn't have, from my understanding, the architectural license as long as Apple has. Apple actually had, they were one of the first companies to get the ARM architectural license that allows them to take the ARM architecture and actually use the stuff that ARM has the patents for, but then really tweak it however they want.
Yeah.
Qualcomm was just using the existing ARM cores for a while. So ARM would design their own cores and Qualcomm would just utilize that, be able to make certain modifications, but they couldn't actually go in and architect their own chips completely.
Okay.
Whereas Apple
Okay.
has been able to do that for longer. And while ARM
Yeah.
does have the architectural license now, and I think they have for a couple of years or several years, that's just the type of thing that's like even 5 years of having that architectural license means only 1 or 2 years of having been released chips and having had feedback on those chips from real world market.
Yeah.
And so Apple is naturally just going to have more experience than Qualcomm in really making their own chips.
Yeah, yeah, I think so, and I think they're probably going to do a better job with it. And again, the OS ability is another huge deal. Is
Mhm.
it's going to be easier for Apple and their ecosystem to switch over to ARM, whereas Windows is probably going to be x86 for a long time. And like obviously Windows is the OS, the ultimate OS when it comes to compatibility. Like Windows just works on more stuff. Period. Like Windows can do anything, but that doesn't mean that it does all those things very well.
Oh, yeah.
And
What
so
I
just
fully
because,
expect is Microsoft to eventually just have Windows have unified binaries and just they will require much higher end ARM chips to run as well as Apple's because they're just doing a lot more emulation.
yeah, yeah, because there's going to be some x86 emulation in there. And like x86 isn't going anywhere. Like I do feel like there's some misconception that ARM and other RISC style computing like that is going to be like taking over. And like no, it's specific, and Apple is in a position to be able to do it. It wouldn't make sense for Windows to just like go full in on ARM. What Windows can do is have a Windows 10 version, which we already have, of that is running on ARM natively instead of being emulated. But then any x86 stuff you get still has to be emulated, and the Windows Store can have an ability to sort applications by ARM based.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the other thing is like, Apple has Rosetta, and I just don't think Microsoft would be able to pull that off as well because they don't have experience in these big, significant chip transition processes. Whereas
yeah.
Apple's learned how to do this from Rosetta 1 with PowerPC to Intel.
And the biggest thing that Microsoft's done is 32 to 64-bit. They
Yeah,
haven't changed instruction sets. I mean, they've added instructions, right? Like the x86 instruction set is not the same as it was 20 years ago.
no.
It's been changing dynamically, but the x86 is an incredibly compatible construction set that can or construction instruction set that can do a lot of things. So
Yeah,
my construction set. And I think Apple is in a position to be able to do it, and I don't necessarily think Microsoft's going to be in the position to move away from it that well. Maybe
I think
Windows
they're gonna
10X and
have
stuff.
to in some regards though,
Hmm.
because for one, let's just talk about pricing. Apple is at a
Yeah.
huge advantage as far as being able to put out better quality products for the price or really come down in price, which I think that we're going to see some much cheaper Macs than we've ever
I mean, we've
seen
seen that with
from
the
Apple.
iPhone already. So
Yeah,
Apple's kind of doing
because
that.
for those that don't know, the A13 is a very cheap chip for Apple to manufacture. Sure, they had to spend a
Yeah.
lot on R&D, but it's like $30 to $50 to manufacture.
Yeah, I think the estimate's closer to 30 too, is what people
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Whereas if
So,
you want, even if you want just Qualcomm's chips, it's like, we're talking like potentially $100 per phone
yep.
for their newer chips that support 5G. If you want an Intel chip for your laptop, if you want a high performance one, that's 200 or $300 for the OEM.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a
So
big deal.
if Apple can shave, let's take what's their current pricing on their normal cheapest MacBooks? It's like what, eight or 900
I
bucks?
think it's 900, the MacBook Air.
MacBook Air is 1,000 right now.
Okay, so yeah, it was a
And
1,000,
that's
yeah.
with an Intel 1.1 gigahertz dual core i3. Ouch.
Yeah,
So
the Air is kind of a bad computer, to be
we can
honest.
already assume much better performance from their ARM-based chips than a
Yes.
1.1 gigahertz dual core. However, if they can, in addition to that, if they can release a MacBook Air that performs better for $100 cheaper than the current MacBook Air because they switched to their own silicon,
Yeah.
and then eventually release like a normal MacBook, not the Air model, which would again probably be even cheaper. And they
Yeah.
could go down to like $700. Like
Yep.
if they can, and that would be with way better battery life presumably than any Intel or AMD based
And that was the other
$700
thing I was
laptop
going to
too.
touch on is battery. Yeah, battery's like
Yeah.
a huge deal in this instance.
And
It's, my I've never used a Windows laptop that has very good battery life. It's just not a thing.
yeah. And
And
like so
Mac's
like
already better at that.
yeah. So like think for Windows PC manufacturers, if you're now looking at the fact that Apple can come out with a, let's say $750 laptop that
Yeah.
performs better than the Windows $700 laptops. Obviously, it won't be able to game, it won't be able to do these other things, but for normal users that don't really care about that stuff, if your
Yeah.
$700 like semi-premium product line is just going to get demolished by Apple because Apple switched to ARM, you're going to be demanding Windows give you that option.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so I think there's a lot going for it, and Microsoft's definitely working on it, of course. But it's just I feel like there needs to be a ton of work done on x86 emulation for Microsoft to really pull it off that well, because people are still going to want to be able to install the apps that they want to install that are running on x86. And there will be the understanding that like Adobe will have to create ARM specific ones, which they already have experience in that. But obviously you're not going to emulate video editing software.
That's the other thing, is that Apple doing this is going to make it easier for Premiere Pro on ARM on Windows to eventually release.
Right.
The Nintendo Switch and working with NVIDIA is already going to make it easier for gaming on ARM to come to Windows. All these things are like slowly being laid, and I think Apple is really going to be the thing that pushes Windows to have to do it. But the groundwork is
Yeah.
there in a number of regards. So, I wouldn't doubt we see Microsoft work with NVIDIA, because NVIDIA has the experience in getting gaming to work well on ARM. I wouldn't doubt
They
if we
do.
see Apple work with Qualcomm to try and make even better chips. They've already started doing that. And so like there's these things being laid, and it's just a matter of when it all comes together.
Right. No,
And
that makes sense.
maybe we see NVIDIA drop, because we know that before they had come out with those ARM-based CPUs.
Yeah.
And so maybe we see NVIDIA drop some really good ARM hardware for Windows. The other thing, though, that I wanted to touch on with this is that we've seen a lot of talk about Windows laptops getting like Qualcomm 4G and 5G chips. Well, if Apple's making their own silicon and Apple's making their own networking hardware, since they bought Intel's like
They bought their
radio
5G
division,
modem
yeah.
area. Yeah.
And so if they can integrate that into their Macs, well, now Apple has laptops with 5G that have better battery life than Windows laptops without LTE or 5G. Like that's going to be a pretty bad situation for Windows PC makers, and
This is true.
they're
Yeah.
going to start pushing for these changes if that really does come to fruition, and if Apple can do as good of a job with laptops and Macs as they have with iPad and iPhone.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it puts Apple in this situation where it's like, like I don't know, I feel like the markets are changing in terms of what makes the most sense for a mobile setup versus what makes the most sense for like a mobile extreme high performance setup versus like a desktop workstation setup. And then gaming obviously still just Windows, but like I feel like we're seeing Apple is doing a absolutely fantastic job with everything mobile. Like that's the direction that they're going. And while the Mac Pro is a nice machine, it is very overpriced, despite being really good. It's very overpriced for the hardware that you're getting. You can get equivalent performance from a PC for way, way, way less money. And so like that's the area, like obviously my PC setup here for doing video editing, for doing the podcast and stuff, that is all the kind of stuff that I'm going to continue to do on PC. But like then there's also the aspects of like the fact that I've switched over here to iOS and iPadOS and stuff and have been happier, and the fact that I'm considering a MacBook Pro for my next high performance mobile compute thing. And Apple just seems to be investing more into that than Microsoft and a lot of the other brands are, and obviously Chromebook hasn't gotten anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, like, realistically, you look at the real like the A13 that's in this, and more importantly, the A13 that is in the $400 iPhone SE is way overpowered for a mobile device. And so if
Yeah.
Apple wanted to make a, something more equivalent in performance to, I mean, realistically, it's probably better than the Intel 1.1 gigahertz dual core that's in the MacBook Air. But if they wanted to make something that is even cheaper and therefore would need, less uh, cooling and less, whatever. If they wanted to throw an A13 into a MacBook and make it really cheap, they could probably come out with a $500 or $600 one. It's not going to perform, way better than, they otherwise could do. It's not going to be anywhere near their higher end laptops, but they could.
Yeah.
There are now ways, thanks to the ARM-based chips, that they can really cut costs because you have to spend not just a lot of money on Intel hardware, you have to spend a lot of money on Intel cooling, especially if you want that thin of a laptop.
Which,
Like,
by the way, we're still on 14 nanometer. Sure, they have their 7 nanometer chip that's out, but like that whole thing is still very frustrating. Which I know that's the reason that Apple's been pushed into doing this is because Intel, they've just done a bad job. I mean,
yeah.
let's be honest here. Their 14 nanometer chips aren't very good anymore.
Well, and one other thing that really would be an advantage of Apple having more control over the product stack.
Uh-huh.
If you notice, there's like iPhones, new one every year. Apple Watch, new one every year.
Yep.
iPad, new one every year. When's the next MacBook coming out? We don't know. It's based on Intel's chips. That
Yeah.
could be next year. It could be 3 months from now. It could be 2 years from now. It just
Yeah.
depends on when Intel can get stuff done. And so the
Yeah.
release schedule for Macs has been way less consistent. And I think Apple wants to change that, and they'll be able to make that decision now.
Yeah, I think so, and that's an important move for them. And it's I don't know. Intel is damaging a lot of markets.
Yeah.
So many
And
people are reliant on them, and they're just not doing a good job anymore.
the other thing is, like, ultimately, this is going to lead to some changes on the Windows side.
Yeah.
But what is this like? If Windows starts making a significant switch to ARM, or even like a half-assed switch to ARM, which is much more likely,
Hmm.
what's that mean for Intel and AMD? How do they respond? Because,
Yeah.
for example, big benefit of switching to ARM is battery life.
Yep.
How do they
What do they
just
do? Yeah.
magically get better battery life? Do they
Well,
just
here's
give
what
up
I'll say.
on the long-lasting market altogether, or do they make some
Sort of.
specific changes?
So here's my thought about the way the future will go if ARM really does take off on Windows for mobile compute. The direction that I see AMD and Intel going, and AMD has been doing a better job of like kind of predicting this, it feels like, but I see them focusing on extreme high performance mobile compute, as well as, of course, desktop workstation and server class hardware. And what we've seen is that Intel has spent a lot of money and time and engineering power focusing on trying to do a better job for mobile over the last 5 years or more, and not focused as much on the server markets and desktop markets especially until AMD started pushing, right? And so that is actually, I think, going to be a bad thing for Intel. They've tried to focus on a market that I think once they maybe finally get there isn't going to be there anymore because ARM's beat them by so much. So even
Yeah.
once we get their 7 nanometer or 5 nanometer that's actually good and does have a potentially doubling in battery life, let's say, for example, it's still not going to be the quadruple to up to even 8 times battery life improvement that we can see from going to ARM chips.
Yeah.
And I think that right there is a big deal. Whereas AMD, we've seen them put a higher focus on their mobile compute in the higher performance aspects of it. And I mean higher performance at each category, not higher performance just like gaming laptops, but like the ultrabooks that do have fans, are a little thicker, don't have the most amazing battery life, that can do some real work and potentially a little bit of real gaming. So the lightweight portable units that aren't designed around the always on, I want to write Word documents all day, and are instead around doing minor video editing, photo editing, potentially playing a little bit of games, the higher performance stuff that you can do on a really small machine.
Yeah.
Whereas Intel's been very focused on battery life, downclocking, trying to save power, trying to reduce heat, and AMD is actually beating them in the battery life department. Their silicon's just better right now, and Foveros and stuff may help Intel with that, and they've invested a lot of money in that. But again, I think it's kind of the wrong focus for them, and so mobile is a huge market, and I think that Intel should have instead continued to focus on improving core counts, improving desktop and server compute instead, and predicted better what ARM was going to do to the mobile compute market.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is going to be like, it'll be interesting to see how AMD and Intel try and make money in other ways. So the next thing that we'll talk about is Thunderbolt, which is an Intel thing. So Apple is still going to be using Thunderbolt going forward on their Apple-based silicon chips. So Apple is still going to be using Thunderbolt on their in-house ARM-based Apple Silicon Macs. And that was surprising to me. Although I guess now that I really think about it, it's not too surprising. Especially since Apple did help develop the Thunderbolt standard. So they're probably getting a better price on it than anybody else would because they helped develop it. I would hope that Intel was giving them a discount.
I would hope so.
Because for those that don't know, not just do you have to license it, you have to buy Intel controllers to make Thunderbolt work. Although, from my understanding, Intel's 10th generation chips, I think, will have the controller built in.
So I believe that's the plan. Yeah, that's what I mean. We'll see if that ends up being true, but that's what it looks like.
Well, they mentioned it in the Thunderbolt 4 video.
Okay.
But yeah, so Apple's going to continue using it. And USB 4 supports Thunderbolt 3. So theoretically, a USB 4 port can work with a Thunderbolt 3 piece of hardware, which is great because there's a lot of pretty good Thunderbolt hardware, but not a lot of computers that support it.
Right.
But the reason that I think that this makes sense for Apple to do is that USB 4 is still not super consistent.
So, which is not surprising for USB in general. It has not had any consistency to it for a while.
Yeah, like even Thunderbolt has like a minimum and a maximum support, but it's it already was on Thunderbolt 3 much narrower than USB 4 will be. So USB 4 you can buy a USB 4 cable that only supports 20 gigabits per second versus the 40.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And that alone is a huge thing as far as simplicity. And of anyone to focus on, we want to just have consumers be able to buy and it just work, it's going to be Apple. So, really though, I'm wondering what this means for Thunderbolt-based PCI expansion and specifically Thunderbolt GPU expansion.
Yeah,
am I going to be able to use a 3080 Ti on my ARM-based MacBook Pro?
Like, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, and
I don't know.
How would games run? I can't wait to see the experimentation.
I think most wouldn't. I think games are still going to be x86 based.
Yeah, but that's what Rosetta's for.
That's true. If it's good. If it's that good. Which we'll see.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about Rosetta is that it'll dynamically either run at install time or at runtime based on what it thinks will be needed to operate best. So some stuff it'll run at install time and it'll just run on ARM. And then other stuff, it'll be more of active emulation.
Right, and I think with something like a game, it would have to be active emulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes.
But to talk more about Thunderbolt and kind of how that's changing, Thunderbolt 4, pretty a weird upgrade. Not really what I expected. In fact, if this was USB dropping this update, it would be USB, like let's say they did it for 3.2. It would be 3.2 Gen 2 version 2 or some bullshit name like that. It wouldn't be a full number version or even a decimal.
USB. Anyway.
Yeah. So Thunderbolt 4 is mainly focused on improving consistency and just general refinement rather than being a massive like spec upgrade. And I think that was like a partially conscious decision in that they wanted it to be more compatible with USB 4.
Could be.
But because the max speed of both is the same. So theoretically, a Thunderbolt cable for just data transfer should be able to just work on a USB 4 device. You just
Yeah.
can't take advantage of the Thunderbolt features, and presumably can't use a Thunderbolt 4 based like SSD, for example, on USB 4 because it wouldn't have the controller.
Right,
Would be
right,
my
right.
assumption. But the way that this works, so all Thunderbolt 4 cables have to support the full 40 gigs per second. You
Okay.
can't have like a Thunderbolt cable that's running at 20
Mm-hmm.
gigabits. However, they also did some things like Thunderbolt 3 supported multiple 4K video streams, but you could potentially have cables and devices that only, I think more so devices that only supported one.
Yeah.
Whereas they are doubling the minimum video and data requirements for certain things. So any Thunderbolt 4 device will be required to support two 4K displays or
Mm-hmm.
one 8K display at minimum.
Okay.
No
Okay.
matter
That's cool.
the bandwidth allocation that they have available, they have to be able to support that.
Okay.
In addition to that, the Thunderbolt 3 spec had a minimum 16 gigabits per second for PCI Express, whereas now the minimum is 32. So you will for sure be
Oh.
able to get better or more consistent support from your, Thunderbolt cable for PCI Express devices.
Okay. Okay. That's cool.
So
That's probably gonna help with eGPUs and stuff. Some of the
yes,
bottlenecks that have happened there. So that'd be really nice.
yeah,
Because like eGPUs, that's one of the things they've been suffering from is you do have a really pretty bad performance reduction on most of them if you want to go high
hmm
end. So
yeah.
I like that. That's cool.
In addition to that, one thing that they are doing is making it so that if you have a thin and light notebook that requires less than 100 watts to charge
Mm-hmm.
and it supports Thunderbolt 4, it will be required to have at least one of those Thunderbolt ports support charging.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
for those that don't know, Thunderbolt can do 100 watts of data.
Which is
USB,
enough
anything with
for
USB power delivery can, but
yeah, yeah.
Thunderbolt spec
Also.
is power delivery.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And that's
and
great. And I mean most machines that's enough.
yeah,
I do like that. I mean, like, my Alienware only has a 240 watt power brick, right? So that kind of gives you an idea of what you can do with 100 watts. If I've got a 2080 Max Q, and a 6-core Intel chip in there, right?
hmm
And so, yeah, I want to see more of that. And so I like that that's a requirement, actually. I think that's really important because USB-C all the things, which let's do hope that happens with the next iPhone, even though it's probably not.
I
Um,
doubt it. Yeah.
I doubt it too, but
Um,
yeah, that's nice.
and then another requirement that's a nice addition. Um, and most devices already supported this, but just for consistency's sake,
Yeah.
um, all devices that support Thunderbolt 4 will be required to support waking your PC up from sleep when it's connected to a Thunderbolt dock. So right now there's the issue
Nice.
of you could have a Thunderbolt dock or a laptop that can't wake up from Thunderbolt if you have like a Thunderbolt dock that has a keyboard and mouse connected. They will
Right.
be required to support if you interact with your keyboard and mouse like you would a normal computer to wake it up. It will have to be able to support that.
Okay, that's really nice. I think that's really sweet. That's good.
Yeah. And like,
Huh.
even now with USB docks, that's not a guarantee.
No, no, it's
And
not. Yeah.
so just having again further consistency on that is a good thing. Um, and the other thing is that Thunderbolt docks will be able to have more Thunderbolt ports. So they'll actually support up to 4 Thunderbolt ports now. So you'll
Oh,
have
nice.
docks with one Thunderbolt port going from um, your PC to your dock, and then 3 Thunderbolt ports downstream. So you can, even
That's
if
super cool.
you obviously won't be able to transfer, 120 gigabits per second, but having the consistency of all of these things for display outputs and for waking your devices and charging and all of that, having more ports is actually helpful now, whereas it kind of was less
Yeah.
so before because of the inconsistency.
Right, right, definitely.
And then this last thing might actually lead to it getting more support in certain ways, more people adopting it. So Intel is mandating like specific types of protections for Thunderbolt, whereas one of the concerns with Thunderbolt and with USB 4 actually is data transferring at really high rates is great for consumers.
Mhm.
It's really bad if somebody is trying to steal data.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Intel's putting in specific protections, I think DMA protections, to try and ease certain manufacturers concerns about certain types of products. It's not really something that's going to affect most things,
Right.
but like I believe Microsoft had specific concerns about Thunderbolt and the lack of protections as far as data theft goes.
That was part of why they didn't put Thunderbolt on some of the Surface devices.
Yeah.
So yeah, they've definitely talked about it. I think it's a half-assed excuse, but it's also real.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's yes and no. It's a half-ass excuse. The Thunderbolt or the Surfaces are probably what Microsoft gives all of their employees,
Yeah, and so that's a concern
and
for
so
sure.
they
Yeah.
probably balance like how many people are going to buy our Surfaces that otherwise wouldn't if it had Thunderbolt. What
Yeah.
is the risk of if we're giving all of these to our employees anyway? What is the risk of something happening because we gave them this? Let's
Right.
Probably very few people are going to buy a Surface specifically because of Thunderbolt, because the Surface, like how many, especially the tablet-based Surfaces, how many of those have competitors that have Thunderbolt? None.
Yeah, that's a good
I
point.
don't think I've
Yeah.
seen a single like Windows tablet with Thunderbolt. I'm sure there is, but not very many.
Yeah,
So
you're
it's
right.
not really a risk of loss of sale.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah,
if
that's a
you,
good point. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's actually kind of it makes sense. It's just that we would like to see it.
Oh yeah. And
But
so
yeah,
this might lead to the
them
Surface
finally
getting it.
adding
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Because the Surface
Um,
are still in a lot of ways the best Windows mobile machines, other than probably some of what Dell's putting out. So
yeah.
it'd be nice to have the extra features. So that's good. Very good.
Yeah. And then another new standard or new like protocol that's being updated, that's going to be very, very helpful.
Big
Probably
deal.
much more so than Thunderbolt 4. Um, H.266 got announced.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool. So this is a pretty significant upgrade over H.265. And for reference on how much of an upgrade, at equal quality levels for video, H.266 is expected to use about 50% less data. So
Then 265, which was already a reduction over 264, just to be clear, people.
yeah. So we're talking like obviously, a 10 gigabit or 10 megabit per second stream is not super great quality for 4K,
Yeah.
but like they exist. But like having that same quality at 5, pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty drastic.
And so that also means that we could see a situation where the quality goes up, let's say 50%, and the data usage goes down 25% because they went up some, but the data usage is so much less because of the codec improvement that you're
Yeah.
still using less data and getting better visual quality.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, and that's actually going to be a huge benefit because, of course, one of the complaints that somebody that is, kind of a, I don't know what I'm going to make up a term, quality file when it comes to audio and video and all that kind of stuff. I really care about the image quality coming out of displays, and I have this like inherent frustration because we have displays that just keep getting better and better and more amazing, and look at how cool these OLEDs are, look at all this new tech, and it's like, okay, that's great, except that it literally is no benefit if you use streaming services instead of Blu-ray. Like, it's just not, like, it's hardly any better. Because you still get the artifacts, you still get the low bit rate, and that's an issue. And the ability to improve that quality for streaming is a huge deal. And so this right here is potentially H.266 is going to help with being able to have higher quality 4K streams. And so I think we're going to see potentially just a big improvement in quality rather than much of a data reduction when it comes to streaming 4K through movie services like Netflix, not necessarily YouTube, where I think the data reduction is going to be more important to them.
Yeah, my guess is that most services will see some improvement, but not enough to negate the 50%, or not enough to completely negate the
The like data improvements, yeah.
yes,
And
because
I
they
think
want to
like
use less bitrate so that they can save money. Um,
yes, although like a service like Netflix, for example, is already infrastructured built out to be able to handle, basically everybody has Netflix, to be able to handle that number of subscribers at that bandwidth. And so, unless they see an uptick, they could potentially leave the bandwidth marks similar and just massively improve the quality.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how the world kind of is post-COVID, because every
Yes,
service has
yes,
during COVID caused
had
massive like
issues.
have implemented throttling pretty much globally,
Yeah,
where like no
Netflix has been one of the
services.
ones that hasn't as much, surprisingly.
Yeah,
But
they have done it
yeah,
some though, and it's
yeah,
just area specific.
yes,
Um, but yeah, like this is just going to be all around good for video, and this isn't just for um, like streaming services like Netflix and
Mm-hmm.
Hulu and whatnot. This also dramatically helps improve high resolution 360-degree video,
Yep.
and it also can be used for like screen sharing apps and stuff. Like they actually
Yeah, that's a good
specifically
point.
mentioned 360 video, and they specifically mentioned screen sharing applications in their press release. And I think the screen sharing
Yeah.
applications one is going to be important because even post COVID, we're going to see a lot more people working remote.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
We're going
It's
to see
good.
a
There's
lot more
gonna be
video
a
calls and a lot more
permanent
screen
uptick.
sharing. Yeah.
The
And
the global bandwidth requirements for people has gone up and isn't going to go back down to what it was before ever.
yeah, it'll go down some, but it won't
Yeah.
go back to
No, it's still going to be a
normal.
drastic increase, which of course is, all these ISPs talking about how, we don't need to upgrade our infrastructure, but, they should have been doing it the whole time. They should have been prepared for this kind of crap. But
I
anyway,
mean, when it comes to ISPs, really it comes down to the fact that like they claimed that they needed or to limit data so that they didn't have like throttling and stuff.
yeah.
And then in most areas in the US, most ISPs didn't have to throttle, but they were able to turn off unlimited data. So they clearly have proven that they don't need data
I
caps.
have seen a lot of speed reductions in areas, though, too. And I think what some of
Well,
that comes
again, though,
from
a
is,
lot of services are cutting their speeds.
well, yeah, but I just mean like through like doing manual speed testing.
Yeah.
I've seen a massive, like, I've seen like a halving almost of my bandwidth. But, part of that is also, I think, it's, what am I trying to say here? I feel like, their concern, obviously they haven't been doing the infrastructure upgrades that they claim that they've been doing and that they would need to do, and they've had the money for, and they've been given tax money for. But also, they are trying to guarantee bandwidth, and I think people would prefer just no data caps instead of guaranteeing bandwidth. You know what I mean? Like, if you can get, a plan that's up to, which of course they don't even really guarantee it except on business plans anymore, but like if a plan is like up to gigabit and you're getting 650 megabit, like that's not the end of the world if you have unlimited data. It's the data
Yeah.
caps toppling on that create an issue. And I think just if your infrastructure needs to be upgraded, upgrade it, and you've been given money for that. But also, people should be allowed to use the internet as much as they need.
Yeah. Or at least fucking scale the data cap with the speed that you're paying for. It's ridiculous when you pay for more speed and all that does is help you get to your data cap faster.
Yeah, it's dumb. It's stupid.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff that's frustrating, man. State of internet. Anyway.
But yeah, so this was made in partnership with Apple, Sony, Microsoft, and Intel were some of the main ones listed. I think Qualcomm was also one of the main ones listed. Surprisingly enough, NVIDIA wasn't on the list.
Yeah.
And like no doubt they were likely somewhat involved, but they weren't one of like the main people. Which
Yeah.
so like we had talked before when this had first come out, and I had said that I feel like Apple will probably be the first to market with the
Mm-hmm.
support, and you said Nvidia might, but since they're not on the list, I feel like that might be they're going to be a little behind on.
They could be, unless it's possible that they you know I don't know. It's possible that they are doing back end work on the GPU to make it function. I don't know. Like
Well,
maybe
yeah,
they
I'm
didn't
like,
participate in it, but they obviously still are going to have the information ahead of time.
yeah, but like if hardware is already in development for it when they're doing the press release,
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
it's going to be the partners that directly were involved that had first access.
Yeah.
Like
Right. Right.
they're obviously they need to get Nvidia's support because that'll help accelerate it. But if you're like spending the time to help develop a standard, you're
Mm-hmm.
probably going to get priority in getting access to and not just getting access to, but knowing enough details to really start developing hardware
Right.
much
Right.
sooner than
Yeah.
someone who helped a little bit and got some back end information a little early.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and like Nvidia would make a lot of sense because they both like to support that stuff, and like it would be a huge thing. Nvidia is the type of company that would put H.266 encoder on their GPUs and advertise the shit out of it right away.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But I feel like the reason I think Apple's going to be first to market with support is just that they focus more on long-term support than Intel or Qualcomm.
They do. That's true.
And
That's
when
true.
I'm looking at the list of companies that have directly been on this list and participated, Like the hardware manufacturers that are going to be the most, like the quickest to support it, are going to be the ones that the chips that they sell at the time that would initially support it would be the chips that are still around when it's actually in use. If Qualcomm starts putting it on their phones next year, well, H.266 isn't going to be really utilized on the internet for several years. So it makes no sense for them to drop a chip before the standard is at least pretty damn close to like mainstream.
That makes sense. Yeah. No,
Whereas
that makes sense.
if Apple comes out with a phone, let's I mean, I don't assume any hardware is coming next year with this, but let's say 2022.
Yeah.
That phone from Apple is likely going to still be in use, or not likely still be in use, but could still be in use, and it will still be getting supported in 2027 when H.266 support is going to be much more widespread. And not having the hardware support for that would mean they would have to drop support sooner, and Apple doesn't like to do that.
Yeah, because that's one of the selling points of their products, for sure.
Not even a like, oh, Apple can do it first because they're better or anything. It makes more sense for them to do it soon.
Logical financial sense for them.
It doesn't make business sense for Qualcomm to do it in 2 years or a year.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, Android phones aren't gonna. Yeah. They're not gonna have the same update consistency, so it doesn't matter. They can just support it once it's popular. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. I hope we see a lot to come of it. It's definitely an improvement I would like to see, especially as 8K footage becomes a thing, 8K TVs become a thing, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.